Hello and welcome. My name is Emily Prieto, and I'm the co-host of the Seeds of Tao podcast alongside my husband, Joshua Prieto. We're also the co-owners of the Seeds of Tao education platform, an incubator for regenerative entrepreneurs. If you're new to the podcast, this is a podcast for impact entrepreneurs creating regenerative enterprises. We often get asked what exactly a regenerative enterprise or impact entrepreneur is. So if you're wondering, a regenerative enterprise builds triple bottom line profits through the practice of ethics and principles that lead to a more inclusive, fair, and balanced economy. Impact entrepreneurs, or regenpreneurs, as we sometimes like to call them, are those willing and able to take on the financial and personal risks of starting and building regenerative enterprises. You'll get to know exactly what all that means as you join us for this and future episodes, but know that we welcome everyone to join us as we work to build regenerative economies together. That's exactly why we are here doing what we do at Seeds of Tao. Our mission is to help establish regenerative economies in every bioregion by serving individual regenpreneurs like yourself. In this podcast, you'll hear the startup stories in all their glory from impact entrepreneurs all over the globe. You'll learn and grow the skills of building a regenerative enterprise from your peers, mentors, and leaders. Finally, we'll get to know each other as you engage in the podcast and join the wonderful Regenerative Business Economies Network, aka RegenBen, an open community where peers, colleagues, funders, allies, and supporters of regenpreneurs come together to build and the regenerative economies of the future. Join us every month for a wonderful episode as we collectively move beyond sustainability and into our regenerative future. It all starts now. Welcome to the Seeds of Tao podcast. It's Emily with you this week, and I'm here with Matthew. Super excited to have him on the podcast today. He's got an awesome story. I'm super excited to dive into more. So Matthew, what got you up this morning and excited to do the work that you're doing?
Well, my alarm got me up, and then from there, what made me not hit the snooze button was really driving towards my first practice is meditating. So getting out of my body and into my connection with something larger than myself, it gets me out of bed in the morning. And then that connection continues to drive me throughout the day. I think I never have trouble getting out of the bed, so that's a tough question for me. What gets me to actually put my head to rest is maybe for me a more profound journey. So I think getting up in the morning has never been my issue. I get out of bed and I'm ready to rock.
Awesome. So what is it that's inspiring you in your day-to-day life that's helping you to have that enthusiasm to show up every day and working towards a brighter future?
So I'm currently working on a book for conscious entrepreneurship and the journey of staying conscious throughout being an entrepreneur and facing all the challenges that come along with that. So that book is really driving me right now. And then, the connecting with family, friends, loved ones, moving, being in my body, my spiritual practices, all of those things. And I think also just a real acknowledgement that this is a finite journey and I don't know what's promised. So get up and go be in it and enjoy it.
Nice. I like that. So what got you started? Like if we could turn back time and take you back to kind of the beginning of your journey into entrepreneurship, what did that look like? What was that journey about?
So I think the first thing was I always loved when I was a kid. I was always captain of my teams. I was always in like throwing the party, whatever it was. I loved people and getting people together to see a similar vision. So that looked like being a captain of teams. That looked like throwing parties. That looked like organizing groups to do things when I was a child. So, and I think that's always been a big part of who I am. So I've really enjoyed that. And then later on, I really looked for any opportunity I could to be in these environments where people were sort of raging against the machine or coming together for something really beautiful. It didn't really matter. I just loved being around groups of people all thinking in a direction and feeling something together. So that could look like being at a concert and everybody focused on the person on stage. I would drive anywhere for any sort of protest, not because I actually knew exactly what was happening in the protest, but more because I really loved being in the energy of this field of humans caring so much about something together. So I think that was the start of my realization of how much I love these dynamics of energy and group energy at play, which I think is why I started any business later on in life.
So where was the point? Let's go back to the point where like you really took the leap and became an entrepreneur. Did you have jobs beforehand? Have you always been an entrepreneur?
My first job was I was Sherlock Holmes in a children's museum, leading kids through the event, and then later on I worked in restaurants, and then I was a basketball coach for a very long period of time, and that led me to performance psychology, because I really fell out of love with the wins and losses aspect of being a coach, especially at looking at higher levels. So like once you get into college and pro for sure, the expectation is not about the development of the kids anymore. It's really about wins and losses and producing potential income for the business. Made me fall out of love with that. So I started looking for other ways to work with individuals, and that got me into holistic nutrition. And I started working with people. Well, first I got my master's in performance psychology. So I thought I'd still be working with athletes, but more on their internal performance and not so much with the team aspect and within the business aspect. But then that fell short of what I really wanted. That led me into holistic nutrition, which gave me the scope to work beyond just sports and beyond those things and get into other aspects of somebody's life. Because to me, it made no sense that you would fragment out sport performance from your relationships and from your nutrition and from your lifestyle. And all of a sudden you've isolated this one fragmented piece and you try to work on that. Didn't make much sense to me. I had athletes that were amazing human beings and they would have trouble with their performance, but as a master's in performance psychology, I could only work with them on their actual performance. So if their grandfather was showing up to every single one of their matches and putting unbelievable amounts of pressure, I couldn't go into family unit stuff. If they were eating McDonald's and feeding their body poorly and staying up late and stressed out and not turning in papers, I couldn't go into those things with them. So I think that was the beginning of being like, okay, there's a lot more to hold here than just these fragmented pieces. And then that led me to working for a naturopath in Hawaii at a cancer treatment facility. And I was there and we used juice called Gershon Cancer Treatment. We used juice and raw foods in order to help people overcome cancer to the best of our ability. And in that, I thought to myself, why would anybody wait to be sick to integrate this stuff into their life? And that was the beginning of my first business, was seeing like a future. I could see a vision of a future where people were eating things that nourish their body, and there was no need to be in a place where you had to treat some of these diseases that were maybe preventable. And that was the impetus of the entrepreneurial side, was starting a business to answer that sort of niche, which was my first restaurant concept. But I think that the constantly being willing to go all in on something, and then when the the limitations of that all in emerged, I was willing to push beyond that into something new, which I think is very much a trait of an entrepreneur. But the first portion of my 28 years on this planet didn't probably look like a classic entrepreneurial journey, although I think I was developing a lot of that same skill set. Even in my undergrad, I did interdisciplinary studies where I had to make my own program and write a thesis about it. And I had to defend every class that I was taking to a committee, and I had to get that committee to come together. So even then, I think I was working on the skills to be an entrepreneur, even though I was in academia.
So with this academic background, which gives you a lot of the tools, but at the end of the day, like being an entrepreneur, there's so many things that you can't necessarily expect are going to happen, or roles you need to fill. What was the hardest part for you in an actual role as an entrepreneur? What was the biggest challenge for you?
I think my ability to manage my internal state throughout the process was the biggest challenge that I faced throughout if I look at like the whole career, if I broke it into parts, there's probably different parts, like not knowing what was going on in my first business and being surprised by like how long permits took, and like, that some of the trials and tribulations that every entrepreneur goes through with legal battles and things that they were unaware of, and sudden costs that they didn't, put into their budget. These sort of things, those classic things are there. But real talk, I think self-management was my biggest challenge throughout the process. And I can expand on that more if you desire.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important that we go into that. I think that that's a big thing that no one talks about in entrepreneurship, right? But if the entrepreneur is struggling with anxiety, struggling with depression, or they're out of whack, like their whole business suffers. Like it's really our well-being, our inner world creates our outer world type of a thing, right? And it's so potent with the state of being an entrepreneur and the connection between us and our business. So I'd love for you to expand upon that, because I think it's so pertinent.
Yeah. So my first business, I started with like this beautiful vision of a community that enjoyed eating healthy foods, like that found it fun. I was super into it. And I created my entire business to really facilitate this experience that would give people a taste of an energy where healthy was not an arduous task, but it was actually so enjoyable and identity affirming, meaning like, that it was not just for the hippie health nuts or those who were had been through bad experience, but it was actually for those who just wanted to feel great. And it could also speak to the lifestyle that they wanted to portray to the world, because I wanted to tap in to that need to be identified with community and fit in as much as I could. So my first business really did a great job of that and took off like gangbusters. Like I remember my manager, Vince, shout out to Vince if you're listening, I wanted to make a lot of juice before it was a juice bar and vegan food spot in Miami, Florida. And I wanted to make quite a bit of product for our first day. And we hadn't gotten our permits. So I still had paper on the walls, but I couldn't afford to make payroll if I didn't start to sell stuff. So I just kept everything on the outside of the restaurant looking like we weren't open, and texted all of my customers and people that had known me for the years prior, working with them, and that were expecting my stuff, and like put out some, a little bit of media. Back then that was Facebook on it. And he was like, I don't think people are going to show up. I don't think we should risk it. I'm like, trust me, people are going to be there. And, people showed up with paper on the windows, looking like we were closed before we were ever officially open. And, 2 weeks later, when we got our and officially opened that first Saturday. We opened our doors at 8 a.m. on a Saturday with a line around the block. So it took off like gangbusters. And with that, so did quite a bit of stress and attention. So a lot of things that I was not prepared for to manage in my own internal state. So a lot of people, I would have people come by and be like, I want to invest. I was not prepared to handle those conversations. I had, people coming in and asking me to attend all these social events. I had real estate agents coming in nonstop asking me to be in their developments. So it was just stuff that I wasn't prepared for on that end. And then also once we did decide to expand, we expanded really rapidly. And I was not prepared for the internal things that would cause. For me, I didn't understand at that point in time in my career that just because I could drag it and click it on an Excel spreadsheet didn't mean that was going to play out in reality the same way. And the ability to sustain a great culture and things like that within the internal organization stressed out, which caused stress on me. So now I have all these external pressures and mounting new internal things going on. All of a sudden, I'm on a cover of a magazine. So now I'm starting to identify with these things that I'd never identified as before, like an entrepreneur, as like a visionary in a community. So my ego starts to tap into all these things. And now I'm less aware. I had a strong meditation practice, a strong yoga practice for many, many years prior. But these are new things that I'm tapping into that I never had before. So I got lost in that feedback from the world. And now, in my experience, psychologically, it's really easy when we're unable to manage our state and what kind of energy we're in, and then also now our ego is really what I would call inflamed and sensitive. It's really easy to drop into a very reactive amygdala-based mental state where now all of a sudden patterns that you're not even really aware that you're choosing are starting to erupt. And for me, that looked like being very reactive to things and losing my ability to hold the consciousness and whole of my business in a really thoughtful way. So that's what I mean by self-managing, is like the ability to know what personality of mine is emerging, and being able to get, classic Viktor Frankl is like space between stimulus and response. That was one of the books that I read when I was like, I think like 17 or 18, that put me on my journey of wanting to understand how we show up psychologically to perform. And when you're in a reactive state with an inflamed ego, and it's so easy to drop into that, the space between stimulus and response is very, very brief. And I wasn't finding much space in that. So I was reacting from patterns that didn't serve the direction of the business that I really wanted to create. And there's so many attachments in there. It's a complicated journey as an entrepreneur, but that's what I mean when I say the ability to be self-managing.
I totally get that. I think that's really important because a lot of times we'll talk about, how to keep going as an entrepreneur when you haven't kind of hit your stride yet, right? When you're still like in startup mode and you don't quite have all that momentum and all the challenges that come there. But just because all of a sudden it's like, oh, I've got enough customers and it's blowing up, that doesn't mean that the challenges are over. Like things just change, and challenges, you are constantly learning these new weaknesses or kind of soft spots of yourself as the landscape is changing with your business. And things change and morph, but it doesn't necessarily like, oh, now it's easy.
Yeah, no, I think I think the discipline to make the process easy is in performance psychology, what we would call internal locus of control, which is, my pops also said this growing up. So shout out to my dad, who always said control the controllable, but it's really real. And it's like this growing fear of other people's opinions, fear of missing out on opportunities, this externalized thing that happens when you have a business, because it's like, you're taught that you're doing it for the customers and to constantly be taking feedback, whether that's data, and you externalize all of this control over what you deem as successful or what you deem as worthy of doing. And I think that's a really dangerous pitfall to where that stuff can emerge as it's happening. I think that the journey can be more fluid if the focus and the discipline is on self-management in that process. And it's not that your business is an opportunity to express that ability to self-manage and design, but it's not the thing. And I think that at some point, a lot of entrepreneurs, including myself, get very lost in thinking that the business is them and that it is the thing. And then the field of energy to be able to stay conscious collapses really quickly. And I think that's all an understandable journey. And the life is unpredictable. We never know what's going to happen. Every day is unpredictable. Moment to moment is unpredictable. So I think people are well in tune to that. So my personal belief is that it's not predictable anymore, and that there's these new things. It's more the over-identification with it that is the potential pitfall for entrepreneurs. And what are they really working on? And remembering that what they're really working on, and this is, more from the regenerative design side that I'm now speaking from, is that what they're actually working on is really alive and keeping it alive. Because as soon as it's objectified, or as soon as you're working on the thing, rather than people's lives or a vision of a future that you desire, I think that's when those external challenges, whether they're new or not, become overwhelming for an entrepreneur on their journey.
Let's take a moment for a promotional break to tell you about a course Seeds of Tao has just released in its beta form. The entrepreneurs that listen to this podcast want to see change. We want to be the change, and we want to bring that change. We want to change the culture from an extractive and degenerative one into a permanent regenerative one, a culture that cares for its people, planet, and future. This is the reason why so many entrepreneurs we talk to at Seeds of Tao start regenerative enterprises. They don't do it for the money. They do it because they want to see change. The challenge is that it's hard to build a business, especially a regenerative one, that is the catalyst for change. I often interview and speak with individuals that have managed to build a business and livelihood from their passion. And they often tell me that they wish they could do more, or they feel like their efforts aren't enough. They want to scale their efforts and the efforts of others, but they don't know how. Don't we all feel this way sometimes? We see our neighbors, industry, peers, suppliers, producers falling further into degenerative practices, and we think, I've made the change. Why can't they? How can I get them to change? We know it's hard to change, and for some, it's harder than others. We also know that we can't change others, only ourselves. We can, however, pave the way for change and make it easier for the next person to be that change. That path always starts with a story. Seeds of Tao has launched its first online course for regenerative entrepreneurs, and its objective is to help you pave the way to regenerative change through the power of your brand story. You'll learn to naturally grow and scale your business using brand storytelling and other inherent marketing systems that have stood the test of time. As you do this, you'll learn to do it in a way that influences change, not forcing change. No, we should never do that. It never works. Nor should we manipulate, even though it's an unethical way to make things work. Let's be a positive influence through the story and the message that we put out. The course is called the StorySeed, and it's the first of 6 initial courses we're releasing to help regenerative entrepreneurs build the regenerative economies of the future. The first 500 students to enroll in StorySeed will gain lifetime access to this course and the other 5 courses in our initial catalog. To give you an idea of what some of those courses will be, in addition to StorySeed, which covers marketing and messaging, we're building a funding and finance course and a course that helps you navigate the cultural forces and flows that you face as you create systematic and cultural change in your industry. On top of lifetime access to the Pando Academy course catalog, you'll be able to join us for weekly office hours, utilize step-by-step action workbooks, get discounted prices on other offerings, and other amazing benefits. This is a beta offering, which means you're helping us pioneer an education platform and accelerator for regenerative entrepreneurs. If you're an innovator and early adopter building a regenerative enterprise, come pioneer this with us by following the promotional link in the description or show notes and enrolling in StorySeed. Okay, let's get back to the episode.
I totally agree. And I know I talk to entrepreneurs all the time at various stages of their journey, but it's a really hard thing if you have an idea and then it doesn't work out, oh, well, I'm going to create this new event or whatever, and no one shows up, to not take that so personal for either it was really successful or it totally didn't work, but to separate ourselves from that emotionally. This is not a judgment on me. I'm not selling myself. I'm selling a product or service, whatever, and creating that emotional distance, that space, like you were talking about. I love that book. We always talk to our kids about that. Space, stimulus, and response. Give it space. Do not just react and hit someone. Oh my gosh. It's real. I think it's so important, and it's easy for someone else to say it to us, right? But we need to be reminded of that often, because we will unconsciously slip into that.
And that's what I mean by the discipline. The discipline is to manage, self-remember, to build your self-awareness. The commitment to that, I think, that's what I'm writing on. That is what I'm passionate about in this entrepreneurial journey, is not just regenerative entrepreneurs or impact entrepreneurs, because I believe once we become conscious and self-aware of ourselves, we're all going to be impact entrepreneurs. There won't be a separation. You won't need to sign up for some sort of novel idea that's going to save some idea that we have about the world. But just by being in a practice of remembering who we truly are, and that we're not all of these ego personalities, and we're not this reaction, that we have a true higher self that we can tap into, and that we are conscious humans, and we have the ability to hold consciousness, even though our brains are built to have a personality and to protect. And those things are wonderful. I love my personality and my ability to cook, and I love it. It's so much fun for me to go and cook for people and get adoration for how good my food is. I love it, and that lifts up my will to go and do that. But what space and energy and thoughtfulness am I doing that from? I think is the real journey. And I think once people work on that, no matter if you start off as selling car tires, or planting trees, or rewilding, or whatever it is, I think if their consciousness is being worked on, developed, and grown, and the capacity to hold higher order thinking and more possibilities and care about others and manage internal state, then I think we're all going to be impact entrepreneurs, or impact whatever, impact teachers, impact firemen, impact whatever.
Impact people.
Impact people.
That's great. And so you touched on a little bit, well, now coming from a regenerative perspective, I'd love to hear how you kind of got into that world and what that journey was in terms of the regenerative side of things.
Oof. Well, my first business, like I said, blew up and then failed like catastrophically, like it just like imploded and went really terrible at the very end. I grew it really fast, and I noticed three things that really stuck out for me in my journey. I went from 1 to 15 locations, and in a matter of about 4.5 years. I started off in my house, like my business. Literally, I started off in my kitchen, and then went into a catering kitchen, and then opened up my first store, and then signed a deal with Whole Foods and expanded into 9 locations with Whole Foods. And then we had 6 of our own locations. And it was just overwhelming. And the three things that really stuck out for me, besides this journey that we're talking about, that we've been talking about, is also the fact that even though my bottles were biodegradable, like we were just creating so much waste. And Whole Foods in that relationship also wanted us to have our shelves full all the time. So we were also creating waste on the product side at the end, or in the last like 3 years at astronomical rates, like just throwing away like good food. And there's 10 pounds of produce in some of these, little 16-ounce juices. So it's like, it's just like, it's crazy to think about how much we were wasting. So there's this ecological wastefulness that was happening in restaurants that I got to know really well, and in grocery stores by being behind the scenes inside of a major grocer. And then, so this gap between what we really need to be thinking about ecologically was there. And then also, I was selling $10 juice to people with $10,000 watches, paying people $10 an hour. And I was like, and my landlord was getting super rich, and I was struggling every day. And my landlord, my original landlord, God bless him, he was able to fill up every empty store next to us because our business was very successful and very busy. So people wanted to be a co-tenant with us. Other landlords used me as like a Trojan horse of gentrification. So I'm like seeing these people get wealthy, and then I'm paying these people $10 an hour. So I saw this like big disparity in there, and this big gap in economically that didn't feel good. And then also spiritually, there was a huge divide in when we expanded. The business was so spiritually enlivening for everybody in it and its community when it first started. And it was spiritually deadening as it expanded for me, for the employees inside of it, and for the communities that we were a part of. And I was like, okay, there's got to be a different way. I know I don't want to do business like this anymore. So a good friend gave me a book by Otto Scharmer called Theory U. And I read that, and that was all about awareness-based change theories and system theory. And he's a professor at MIT and does great work. And I started studying with Otto, went to Berlin a couple of times to study with him, and it was just a great community, and it really advanced my understanding of how dynamic things were. So I started to see in systems. And then that led me to finding Carol Sanford, who's a leader in sort of regenerative design and regenerative thinking, and specifically regenerative business. And I started studying with her, and I'm a student of hers in her school. And that also then led me to Regenesis school, which I graduated from, and then also Lift Economy, which is another program to look at different ways of doing economics. So I started putting together all these things, including regenerative design, in order to try to answer those three major gaps that I saw, and divides that I saw in running a business as usual. And my hope was to open up a new business and close some of those gaps. If not, emerge something new that was completely healed from those gaps, if possible. And that's how my sort of impetus and why that I got into regenerative design.
Awesome. And so I know that, when we talk about regenerative business, it's not something that's like in a dictionary somewhere. It's not some generally accepted term that everyone knows exactly the definition of. It's, a little depends on the person. So how would you define regenerative business with the knowledge that you have?
I think I would try to keep it as simple as possible, which is that it adds more life to the systems around it. And that's as simple as it gets, So, I think that there's nuances to that, Carol's really good at defining the paradigms of thinking that we can emerge these concepts from, and there's a very classic extractive paradigm that business can be done from, right? There's an arrest disorder paradigm that business can be done from, and extract is like, coal mining is a very extractive, obviously extractive business in several different ways, both in its methods and the way that it operates, right? And then you have an arrest disorder business, which might be some sort of like medical-based, pharmaceutical sort of thing that might operate at both those levels. And then there's another paradigm that's called the do-good paradigm in Carol's work that's very much like has a real and you got to love everybody who's doing this sort of work, but it has a real dark side to it, which is like the trying to solve some world problem from this idea of like, I'm doing good in the world. But this is also where, colonizers' minds come from, right? Is like, so there's a real potential for dark side on the do good. And then regenerative is more working on evolutionary potential within systems and creating more capacity to evolve and be more self-determining. So there's a real self-awareness to not project so much. Whereas in the do-good paradigm, you're really saying like, I know, or I think that this is the best way. So I think giving more life to the system also means that there's a real unifying trust within that system. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't lack layers and leadership in it. It's just a different system of business than maybe a do-good like Tom's or one of these sort of brands, a one-to-one sort of brand. And it's really, there's a lot of complexities to being a regenerative business. So it's both, that's the most simple way, but there's a lot to hold that's underneath that simplicity of adding more life that, we'd need, at least 5 years to really probably hold all of it together. So not sure I can hit it all in this conversation, but hopefully that at least gives an idea of how I would define it.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think it's still a little nebulous for us because it's like this ideal is a regenerative business, right? Is anyone doing that 100%? Probably not, but that's the ideal. And we're all cultivating towards that, right? And trying to align ourselves further because in this day and age, like there's some kind of extractive systems that businesses have to utilize to even do business. But hopefully things are starting to shift so that we can find more regenerative solutions on the market on a broad scale so that we can all as a whole move towards more regenerative business and more regenerative economies.
Yeah, and I think that this is like that fight that we all go through that I'm hearing in what you just shared, right? Is like I think part of being a really good regenerative practitioner is being practical and avoiding being mechanistic, right? So by even thinking that there is such a thing as 100% is because we've been trained so hardcore to believe that that's what we're aiming for via the massive amounts of programming our entire life.
And then you get an A.
And then you get an A, right? And it's like, even with the best of intentions, it's so hard not to fall back into those old paradigms. So that discipline to continue to work our minds to stay in higher ordered thinking, to work ourselves to stay in that, so like we can evolve out of this concept that like we are working towards 100%, because the evolutionary potential that we see now is not what the evolutionary potential that your kids will see, like that's just a fact, like they'll see way beyond. So the assumption that like we could get to a 100% of anything is a mechanistic, non-regenerative paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we free each other, free ourselves from this mechanistic point of view, in this authoritarian, as if like we're going to eventually get a pat on the back for being good at what we do, and how do we get free from that? That's a major ceiling or breakthrough or limitation that I think we all have, is to break this pattern and this programming that we've received, that this is the way to do it. And to, especially if you're this is my limited knowledge, but I feel this way because Americans were so trained to be efficient. And unfortunately, a lot of the world has taken our lead. And it's like, this celebration of eating quickly, of fast foods. This is a bit of my health soapbox, but, it's just like this entrainment to be that productivity is the way to measure success. But I don't know if that is, and our buying into that and our way of doing school in order to facilitate that mindset and to facilitate that industrial look at life is really hard to free our brains from. My parents gave me TV dinners and they used canned food because they were being great Americans. They were being really great Americans. And yeah, I have digestive issues and things I've had to overcome because we were being great Americans. And how to free ourselves from that it's a journey that I'm really interested in. And that, that's why I get up and write. To answer your first question, I want to be free. And I want everybody around me to be free to explore their evolutionary potential and to love on each other and to find more peace in this world. So I get up and I go find that for myself in my meditation. And then I get to work on this book, hoping that it's helpful for entrepreneurs to be able to find theirs.
That's so great. There's so many things that you just said. I'm like, oh man, so many ideas, but it's so true. I think that those of us kind of in the regenerative world, so to say, who speak regeneration, right? We're starting to increase our consciousness level because we're sick of business as usual, life as usual, per the status quo. And we're seeing that there's flaws. And yet it takes so much reprogramming, like program we didn't even know that we had. I definitely, even still, I have a hard time rewriting my programming of being efficient. I have 4 kids in 5 years, and I am all on top of all the systems and making sure everyone does this and everyone does that. And if seriously, still in my mind, when I get through the end of the day and I've checked off everything on my list, I give myself a pat on the back. I'm like, today was a good day. I got a bunch done. And that's my default as to how I measure it. Oh, well, I got a bunch done. Right.
Yeah.
And not only do we just as individuals have so much programming, but it's a whole other level in the realm of entrepreneurship, because what we've learned about business is built on a lot of those extractive systems, right? I mean, there's pioneers coming out with new ways to do things. Conversations are being held. Things are shifting. We have to be careful we don't bring that programming to the table, because we don't have to. But if we're not aware of it, it's all going to come with us.
Yeah, and I think this is like, that's such a great example, like a real grounded example of what I was talking about, and a lot of what I believe is the process for being able to understand the mental mode and energy that you're in, and I think we have to honor all parts of us. We are, physical beings that like physical pleasures of life. There's certain things that turn us on neurochemically that like make life really enjoyable. Like, what are we here for if we don't get to experience these meat suits in a way that lights us up? And then there's also our ego, our minds that have formed these ideas, like, like doing the checklist feels really good. And like being like, I did a good job today feels really good. And then there's the consciousness around holding all of that. And then can we bring a level of energy and purposefulness to how we hold our to-do list? And can we enjoy the fact that it feels neurochemically really good to get things done? I mean, we are human beings, and we like to do stuff. We like to get stuff done. We like to touch stuff. We like to finish things. And I don't think that that's going away. But what is the real values underneath those needs? And how do we meet them from our highest level of thinking and our highest consciousness without denying any of the levels of need?
Absolutely.
And I think that that's like for me, at least, that's the magic sauce that I'm after as I move through life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's a little dangerous, because if we look too like badly on that programming that we already have, we can get into a really big shame spiral. You know what I mean? And feel really down about ourselves. And like, that's not serving us anyways. How can we show up? First of all, let's just be conscious of what we're bringing to the table. And then we can choose what we want to keep going, because not all of that is bad. But how can we then serve ourselves to our highest level to bring the things that are genuinely serving us to the table? One thing I know I was talking about, the checklist. One thing just personally that I've been trying to do, okay, there may be a checklist, but did I take care of myself today? How am I doing emotionally? Am I nurturing myself? Did I brighten someone's day? Like, there's so many other invisible metrics that are totally there and valid, and also fill our cup and those around us that we should be aware of. Especially with being an entrepreneur, sometimes we just focus on, the bottom line. Is this serving people, and is it serving people because therefore that is my profit, is directly related to who am I serving? And that's not just what it is, right? What are all the invisible, I say do good metrics, but not in reference to like the bad do good paradigm, but really like, what's the positive impact metrics that I can see? Because at the end of the day, we're trying to increase our positive impact, increase the narrative, help people to have paradigm shifts, to start thinking in a more regenerative way, a more conscious way, and let those invisible metrics sit and nourish our cup while keeping it about the business and not as a reflection of ourselves. Right.
So I think so now I just said like our human body needs, our ego needs, and our higher purpose self lifting all those up. And that was based on, thinking about you and your individual day and grounding it into doing a to-do list, right? So now going with what you were just talking about, let's move that into an example of a business, right? So in a business, we have our basic needs as a business, just like our human body needs to be nourished. So does a business. It needs to make money. It needs to pay people. It needs to do all the things that it needs to do. And then it has its brand. It has its image. It has all those things. And those needs need to be met too. So the premises that we operate, especially when it comes to metrics, and this is if I'm offering this for like, if you're met with a business that you're working with and their metrics seem like off to you, right? Like those aren't really measuring anything that feels impactful. So what I would suggest then is getting underneath what is the true value that they're seeking through that metric, right? And by bringing attention to the true value that's underneath that, most likely what you will unveil is a higher order value that you can then start to work around. So in this case, it might be that like your client says customer retention. Okay, well, what's the real value of retaining a customer? Well, underneath the value of retaining a customer is developing long-term relationships. Okay, what's the real value of a long-term relationship? That we're really there for each other and we can evolve together. Okay, now we're starting to get into something that's a little bit higher of an order. So maintaining relationships, being able to evolve together. So what would a metric be around evolving together? How would we know that? And now all of a sudden you're really focused on a process metric rather than an outcome metric, right? So by seeking the values that are underneath these things that when we're operating, and this is why the do-good paradigm is dangerous, right? Is like if we make it right or wrong, and we are working on as regenerative practitioners, if I am working with a client and I'm making it about being regenerative instead of about working on the thinking that's happening around whatever we're doing and knowing that there's no 100% to get to and that we're just working on our thinking. We're not working on being regenerative. We're working on our thinking, and we have a vision of a world that might look regenerative, but really the way of getting there is to be a part of an evolutionary process. And this is regenerative business versus a do-good business would be like, let's change that metric so it measures something that's impactful, where a regenerative business would be like, let's think about our thinking and how we're thinking about this metric. And is it adding evolutionary potential or more life into the systems that we're working on? And how are we going to have metrics around that is always a big question. I think that we're still trying to figure out in the community of regenerative work is how we hold metrics. Nora Bateson is in warm data, if people want to geek out and go down that rabbit hole, I think is really interesting. I won't pretend that I fully understand it yet, but I think it's a really great hole to get lost in for a day or two if somebody desires that. But I would say that's a big difference in regenerative business versus like a do-good paradigm of business when it comes to metrics.
Cool. I think that's a great tear apart of that. And it kind of goes back to that space between stimulus and response. For me, instead of just looking at the metric, but what's behind the metric, how do we pull that apart? We're like adding that space to find further value and to bring further insight as to why that is or isn't important, or how can we make that more important and more linked to our core, to our why, to our vision, to our mission.
And I think operating, this is where premises and understanding your beliefs are so important, right? I operate, thanks to my mom, this was like, I didn't have to do much on this pattern. My mom pushed this into my head when I was a kid, is everybody is good. There's no such thing as a soul that is born bad. And I operate fully with that premise. So when I have somebody that's in front of me that's being a complete like narrow-minded inconsiderate jerk towards like whatever they're trying to do. If I have that premise that everybody's good, I know that whatever they're doing isn't what they're really after. And I know that the business that's doing harm deep down inside, that's not what they were really after. I went to a Quaker school growing up and then worked at a Quaker school for a very long period of time. And I came to find out that Quakers actually invented prisons, which are now a horrible thing in this world and operate terribly. But originally it was because people were being burned at the stake, and they were trying their best to figure out a different way of doing things.
Wow.
And I think everybody is trying to figure it out, is trying to do their best. And if we can hold that as a premise when we're working with clients and they're not on track and they're not fitting into our identified way of looking at what is sustainable, what is regenerative, what is good, what is bad, and we can help them see their thinking and get underneath the hood of what they really valued. Maybe it was what they really valued 30 years ago. Maybe it was what they really valued a year ago. But trying to find and lift up what it is that they were really after in the beginning, because I think, people doing the most extractive, worst stuff in the world probably started from a good place. And most people that are doing shitty things to other people in the world or in kindergarten or wherever, when we send our kids to school, those kids aren't bad kids. They probably really value something underneath that behavior that they're not getting. And how do we meet their needs? And I don't think it's any different with, a 60-year-old business person who's extracting value like crazy. When they started, they probably were after a certain value that they needed to get met. And how do we meet that need from higher order thinking is I think what really interests me and the work that I get excited about doing.
Awesome. That was very insightful and very important to keep in mind. There can be a lot of, in the regenerative realm, we can see a lot of negative energy being held and kind of thrown out at these extractive businesses, but that negative energy isn't serving anyone, and it's especially not serving us. So I think it's important to keep that type of open-minded and understanding, empathetic perspective. Otherwise, it is only shortchanging ourselves and our business and our growths. Right. Well, awesome. It has been such a wonderful conversation. I love all the different places that we went with it. So if people are interested in getting in contact and learning more about your book, where can they reach out to and get in contact with you?
I'm still working on the book. This will be my first book, so I don't know when it'll come out. I'm hoping to finish in September, and I don't know what the rest of that journey will look like. But I am going to be launching classes and workshops and other things, so people can follow me on @by_Matthew James. It's MattheWJames @Matthew James. And that's probably the best way to get a hold of me. I don't, if you're in New York or Hudson Valley area, please shoot me a DM, and I'd love to link up. I host dinners with other people that are looking to work on their thinking and regenerative design, and love to cook for people and love to gather people together and look at how we're thinking. So if you're in that area and you'd like to come to a dinner, please DM me.
Awesome. And we'll have links to that and the different resources that you mentioned throughout the episode in our show notes on our website. So you can find all of that together. Awesome. Well, it has been such a pleasure. I hope you have a great rest of your day, Matthew. And thanks to our audience. Keep growing your minds, keep growing your hearts, keep growing your gardens, and keep growing your businesses. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. It really is a blessing and a pleasure to bring each episode to you. So what'd you think? If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review or follow us on the podcast platform of your choice. Each review really does help us to further the reach of this podcast and move our mission forward to build regenerative economies in every bioregion. If you have a suggestion or feedback for us, please let us know in the open and free Regenerative Business Economies Network, known as RegenBen, which is linked in the description and in the show notes of this episode. RegenBen also has an awesome community request form that allows you to suggest guests, register to be a guest on the podcast, and share your own regenerative entrepreneur startup story, or any other suggestion you may have for the community. Without your feedback and requests, this podcast and community wouldn't be what it is, so please let us know. Now, this may be bye for now, but remember, it doesn't end here. It has only just begun. The regenerative economies of the future start now with you.